Hey, thank you for opening this mailing list. You find me just, as always, contemplating life and death. I saw Francis Bacon, the artist, say yesterday, he didn't say it yesterday, he probably said it in the 70s, let's face it, he's been dead a while, that you can't be passionate about life without having a clear understanding of death, and that there's a sort of a symbiosis between this understanding of the inevitability and certainty of death and a kind of a passion for life. I've been doing this meditation, as a matter of fact, this Buddhist meditation on death. Have I sent that to you? It's very good. Maybe I'll post it. It's like a 20-minute meditation where it just talks you through the inevitability and certainty of your death. There are two things certain about death. One, it's going to happen, and two, you don't know when it's going to happen. That's it. And that the death rate, as our man David Kessler said in the Under the Skin podcast, the rate of death for human beings is 100%. That's the rate that we'll be looking towards. So man, it's good to meditate on it, and it's good to have an appreciation of it. Last week we done a Zoom call with Biet Simkin. The next Zoom call will be on Thursday the 18th of March. Look out for the link coming in the next email. I don't know who I'm going to do it with yet. If you've got some suggestions, put your comments here. If there's someone you'd like us to get, probably want us to get Wim Hof or someone. I don't know who you want us to get. Let us know who you want to get to drop into the Zoom call. We'll try and get them for you. Over the course of this mailing list video, I'm going to talk to you about my new Audible original, Revelation. I'd really like you to pre-order that if possible. There's a link included here if you want to get it. In Revelation, I talk about the experience of the year of lockdown and how in this kind of place of forced monasticism, loads of revelations and realizations came to me through death. Like my cat died, one of my friends died, someone local in the community died, and how these experiences of death, like I was talking about in that meditation earlier, brought to my attention, I suppose, obviously transience, but also the significance of the sacred and how all of our lives and all of our systems are built on things that are temporal rather than atemporal. If we build our lives around things that are atemporal, not contingent on time, it means we're connected to something that we're not going to lose. Now, of course, like we get into pretty complex ontological territory here, because no one knows what happens after death. No one knows if consciousness continues after the life of the body has expired, and I'm certainly not claiming to have access to any information beyond that. But what I do know is that if you tether your values to things that are impermanent and temporary, it can create a life that starts to be devoid of meaning. So in the book Revelation, I talk about how our cultural values are tied to things that are temporary, our personal values are, and that we need a kind of top to bottom re-examination of the way that we organise society. We're seeing the symptoms of it everywhere. I talk about it a lot in my videos, the consequences of globalization. You might want to have a look at the video I did about Bill Gates and farming. There's a link to that here. It's a really good video where I talk about the way that I suppose power is migrating in directions that I'm kind of uncomfortable with. If you want to learn a little bit more about death, you might want to sign up to Luminary and listen to the podcast I did with David Kessler, the grief expert. Imagine this, David Kessler's been an expert in grief his whole life, and then he lost his son. Like having written many of the books that are the go-to books for the kind of support groups he had to attend to cope with his grief. It's a fascinating episode. If you want to sign up to Luminary, there's a link to that here. But also, this isn't just for me to promote stuff for you. I'm grateful that you've given me your time. Remember, I've promised to do a Zoom call for any of you that can prove that you've got 10 people to sign up. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
If you can prove that you've got 10 people to sign up to this mailing list, then I'll do a live Zoom call with you. And before we go too much further, I suppose what we should decide what we're going to call this thing. Some of the names that are being suggested, so that we don't call it something like a mailing list, an email list, something cold and loveless and corporate. Here are some names that are coming forward: The Collective, The Brand Society, The Brand Band, nice, catchy, alliterative, rhyming, so many poetic ideas colliding. Fellowship, oh, I get you. Alliance, I like that because of the evil alliance in Star Wars. Nexus, I didn't even think of that one. I like the word nexus because it's got an X in the middle of it, and X is an interconnection, and it's at the middle of the word, so it's a very satisfying little piece of syntax. Thinkers that you want covered, by the way, because today we're doing Oscar Wilde, what Oscar Wilde means to me and why I love him. Thanks for your comments on Carl Jung, by the way. Christina Limmer goes, I wrote my master's thesis on Carl Jung. I love his work. Yeah, well, let's see this master's thesis of yours. Did you get a good grade? Kate Didcock, bloody love you, RB. Community / Alan Watts. Needed. And you make me happy. Thanks, Kate Didcock. Yeah, I love Alan Watts. He's certainly someone we can do. I also want to do Terence McKenna, but I love Terence McKenna, but the problem is I can't reasonably do mushrooms or any psychedelics because of my problem with drugs. Would you do psychedelics or mushrooms?
Yeah, well, for the mailing list,
Annabelle's considering it. You can't, can you?
No.
Problems with the old druggy wugs. Cass Max says, hilarious, thoughtful, and individual as FC UK. Thanks, I'm glad you enjoyed that. EMC says, thanks Russell, I've absolutely and thoroughly enjoyed learning more about Gandhi and Carl Jung via you. Your thoughts, musings and knowledge is very welcome and appreciated. We're really trying to create free content that is valuable, like the YouTube videos and the stuff we put up on Facebook and Instagram, including the sort of Kundalini meditations and all that kind of stuff. We're starting a new side channel, and soon there's going to be some interesting news coming about meditation. But I can only do these things for free if you support me, and I accept only if you can afford to. If you can't afford to, just simply don't. But if you can afford to and you want to, the stuff that's monetized, like Revelation, like subscribing to Luminary, it really, really helps me. Revelation, I think, is going to be a valuable book. The reason I like it a lot is because I'm talking it as well, you know? I wrote it, so it's a lot more lucid and better constructed than me talking now, for example. Has more research. I'm drawing from years of interviews, and I'm talking about what I think is most important now. How are we going to find meaning and purpose? How are we going to move from globalization to community-based economies? How are we going to re-engage with our planet and one another in ways that are meaningful? How are we not going to ignore the lessons that the coronavirus pandemic has taught us? These are all questions that I talk about in Revelation. It's sort of, in a sense, advocating for a spiritual life in a material world, and I'm a material girl. Okay, so coming up is my little Oscar Wilde thing, where I'm going to tell you why Oscar Wilde is important to me as a figure, a thinker, a writer, and a man. And I'm also going to answer some of your questions, starting with this one from Tracy S. My question is, do you have any ideas why I would tear up and cry in a 5-minute meditation? Is it something that happens to others? How the hell do I make it stop? I don't normally cry, it's freaking me out, plus I'd like to understand this reaction better. Have you ever cried in meditation? Demar has. Annabelle, of course you haven't. Have you ever cried in life at all? Never once in your whole life, of course you haven't. It's pretty normal. I tell you why I reckon it happened, Tracy, is when you stop for a moment, you're allowing a lot of stress and pain to come out of the body, which you probably have learned to cope with and carry. It's probably held somewhere in your body. Something's like, I get headaches, backaches, all that stuff. There are some people who believe that we can heal ourselves of like chronic back pain, migraine, simply by allowing tension that we're holding on to go. Most pain and many illnesses are as a result of inflammation. Inflammation, as the word sort of suggests, it's sort of like a held, taut, throbbing energy. I reckon what happened, mate, is you started to that's the old life, meditate, and it started to come through you, it started to come out of you. That's what I reckon, mate. So it's perfectly natural, and for me it's an indication that you should carry on doing it. Keep meditating, and soon we'll have some interesting information for you around meditation. And my little side channel. Have you watched all of my new YouTube videos, by the way? Have you seen the ones about tech billionaires buying up space? And I mean, the final frontier space, not land space, although they are also doing that. And why it affects you, and like the future's being foreclosed. It's a real good video. We've been doing proper good research now. Gareth and Annabelle mostly do the research. Do you do any research on them videos?
Sometimes.
You focus on the more spiritual things, do you? I should think so too. So like, Annabelle and Gareth do all the prep for me and give me all facts. I try to say nothing that's not, like, I can't underwrite with a fact. So check that out. That's a really, really good video. And the Great Reset, we did a video on, is Bill Gates too powerful? You can see now why we need people to sign up to the mailing list in case we get booted off all social media. So remember, if you get 10 people to sign up and you can demonstrate it, send it to us in an email and I'll do a 10-minute call to you. You're terrified of this idea, aren't you? Because it means checking for all of the emails. But we do respond. We don't respond necessarily to every single email we get, but I promise you I do read them, and stay in connection with me. Here's another question from the audience. This one's from Nancy. I don't know a thing about meditation. On your video you mentioned getting a mantra. What is a mantra and must one have one to meditate? Must you have one? You didn't say one, have one. I thought for a minute that didn't sound like a way a modern person would communicate. Mantra is just a word or phrase. Like there are some traditions like transcendental meditation where a very particular mantra is given to you by your teacher, and that's the mantra you use when you meditate. Also, I got a mantra of Amma, the hugging saint, when I went and checked her in India and stayed on her ashram for a bit. A mantra is just like, it's often in Sanskrit or Hindi or some language we don't speak. It could be like a Zen mantra. I don't know too much about that stuff. But it's simply a word. It could be a word like peace or love, or a phrase like I am loving presence. The great Ram Dass does a cool meditation where he says, I am loving presence. And you just stay with that. What it is it gives your mind something to do. Like if you're anything like me, you'll say, I can't meditate because I've tried to meditate and all I do is think. That's what everybody does. Like you sit down and you shut your eyes and you start thinking about what you want, what you don't want, what you can remember, all these things, But the mantra or the breath, if it's vipassana, is what you hold in your mind to help you not continually think in endless labyrinths of neuroactivity. So if I just return to the phrase, I am loving presence continually, it helps to guide me away from thoughts and that kind of frequency or level of mind of thoughts. Even when I was doing that Buddhist meditation on death that I was talking to you about earlier, all he's doing, this geezer, is go, accept everyone dies, everyone you know is going to die, don't know when you're going to die, but it's inevitable that you will die. After a while, listening to this stuff, my mind changed. I dropped to another level. Where I was still me. And it's not quite dreaming and it's not quite sleeping, but it isn't my normal waking state either. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest that in this state, a lot of healing takes place, and that is very, very good for you. So that's what mantra is. You can just make one up if you wanted, but you don't, like, the reason you don't want to use one that's too evocative is because you might start thinking about the meaning. And in TM, the mantra has no discernible meaning. It's not like, I am God or God is love or anything like that. It's just some meaningless sound, I was taught. And so it prevents you from getting caught up in analysis, because analysis is obviously part of the problem. So, hey, on Under the Skin, I've already talked to you about David Kessler, the death expert, or grief expert. He's not an expert on death. He don't study the ways people die. He's like a grim ambulance man. No, what he does is he talks to you about grief and coping with death and the inevitability of death, and grief in other areas. Like if you're a drug addict, for example, and you have to give up drugs, you go for a period of grief. Or if you lose anything, loss. Like he said, a lot of us are grieving during this pandemic. We're grieving being able to just go to a restaurant, grieving just being able to hang out. You'll like this Under the Skin with David Kessler. I found it very, very practical. You liked it, did you?
Yeah, I liked it.
Well, that's not...
It's sad, but I liked it.
It made you a bit sad in places because of what he was talking about.
Yeah, but it was nice. Like, it was relatable, I think, to the pandemic.
It's relatable to the pandemic. So have a listen to that. And also Joel Backen, he made like a film about corporations, sort of comparing a corporation to a psychopath, basically saying it pursues its own agenda. We did a YouTube video. We just released a 10-minute clip. Here's a link to that 10-minute clip, but it really is worth subscribing to Under the Skin. Again, if you can afford to, and it ain't a pain in the arse to you. Hey, coming up soon, we've got Elizabeth Burton Phillips. She'll be coming on there. She's founded a charity called Drug Fam, which helps people that are left behind as a result of deaths from addiction, or people that are suffering because a family member or loved one is acting out in addiction right now. Could be gambling, could be drugs, could be alcohol. If you've got a problem with that, you should contact Drug Fam, because they're a brilliant little charity, and they'll, wherever you are, and I think probably the world, but certainly in this country, I'm in England or UK, they'll sort you right out. We're going to talk to Merlin Sheldrake. He's a biologist and author of Entangled Life, How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds and Shape Our Futures. I'm really interested in that. I think you can use mushrooms to make paper, hats. He says you could do anything with them. Like I think in that Paul Stammet said they dumped them on that Exxon oil spill and they soaked up a load of the oil and converted it and stuff like that. Yeah, mushrooms, they're the future, fungi apparently. I'm being sincere, I don't know why I'm sounding glib. Here's another question, this is from Charlie. I have anxiety troubles, especially when it comes to relationships and myself. I'm on medication, I've tried a lot of stoicism philosophy to try and alter my way of thinking, but I still struggle. How can I stop worrying about shit as much? Oh, Charlie, darling, I reckon what you might need is to try to, as best as possible, emulate the conditions for which you are evolved. That means I reckon you need to belong to a community, you need to have a place where you can directly talk about your problems. Is there a support group that you could join around depression? If you want some guidance with that, email us at help@russellbrand.com. We'll try and direct you to something local to you. It's normal to think and feel these things. The world is a crazy place, and this is a crazy time. It would be crazy if you just said, I'm happy, I'm in bliss. That would either mean you were mentally ill or you were a transcendent religious figure. So it's all right what you're feeling. You probably need some people to talk to and process it with. You probably need some spiritual practice, such as the ones I've been talking about, meditation, the old tapping, the old breathing. Why don't you make sure and get on that Zoom call and say, I'm Charlie from the email list when you got on there, and I'll make sure that I talk to you directly. Can you make sure you do that? Make sure you do it. We'll announce when the Zoom call is later. Ensure to do it, Charlie. Okay, now before wrapping this stuff up, I want you to make sure you follow me on TikTok if you don't already. We do 5 videos a week, don't we? They're all good. I answer questions, and sometimes I'm forced to follow an embarrassing trend pointing around a screen, which I absolutely detested doing. And if you watch that TikTok video, you'll see that I hated it. That's what you'll be able to see. But now it's time for me to talk about Oscar Wilde, whom I adore. Oscar Wilde, I think I become aware of him because Morrissey liked him, and I was a big, big fan of Morrissey and the Smiths when I was a kid, and I still love Morrissey. Oscar Wilde is fantastic because he fully embodied who he was. Although, I suppose you would say he was a gay man and he had to keep that shit under wraps a lot because it was illegal at the time. He was married and had 2 kids and was living a sort of clandestine gay lifestyle because of, you know, the nature of the law and everything. But what I also love about Oscar Wilde was his regard for beauty, both aesthetic beauty but also inner beauty. He seemed to me to believe that there was something inherently good about being beautiful, about wearing beautiful things. And a lot of these plays and novels are about superficiality and superficial beauty, about witticisms and manners and protocols and ridiculing those things, and how we're all tethered to sort of, what do I want to say, protocols and systems of behaviour that are arbitrary and inherently ridiculous. But in his writing for children and in some of his letters, notably De Profundis, right, he gets right to the heart of the matter of what it's like to have your heart broke and your arse kicked by life. I don't live that far from Reading, and in fact Annabelle lives directly actually in the middle dead centre of Reading. And Reading Prison is where Oscar Wilde was sent for 4 years, and during his 4 years there he got proper deadly ill. He was sent there for sodomy. It was illegal then, and like during that time he wrote the Ballad of Reading Gaol, a very, very beautiful sort of poem about sort of condemnation and death and incarceration. And he wrote De Profundis, a letter to his lover Alfred Bosie, what's his name, Queensberry. When he writes for children, his books like The Selfish Giant or The Nightingale and the Rose, in particular those 2 books, they talk about such a poignant love and a love of spirit and religiosity that I still find them very, very moving. They take you 10, 15, 20 minutes to read, and they get right to the heart of Wilde. I believe that Oscar Wilde preserved his greatest writing and greatest work for his work for children because of the purity, because of the innocence, because there's no need to comment on matters and manners and cultural laws. He was free to be who he really was. There's a very profound and overtly Catholic image, because we forget, of course, that Wilde is not an English person. For someone to be so famous for their use of the English language, but to be an Irish man, it's sort of fascinating. And his sort of Catholicism and the kind of defiance of that Catholicism comes across. And I imagine that there must have been a lot of contradiction held in Wilde. He's also often spoken of as the first celebrity or the first stand-up comedian, even before he was sort of proper notorious. He did that tour of America where he went around giving lectures on aesthetics and talking about wallpaper and shit like that. And like, but they were meant to be sort of super profoundly funny lectures, you know. And his piffy little epigrams, things like, you know, have you anything to declare? When he was at customs, no, I've got nothing to declare but my genius. And all of them sort of little witticisms are wonderful. In fact, this tattoo of mine is a Wilde quotation. If you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they will kill you. I'll keep that about my person as a reminder of the significance of humour, that truth is a very, very powerful thing, and that many of our cultures are designed to disguise truth. So while much of what Wilde stood for was frivolous, I don't mean that if you're necessarily approaching him from the aspect of his sexuality, or indeed perhaps his art, but like he, as a wit in a sense requires frivolity, even if what you're commenting on is profound and important. I see him as a sort of a hugely significant figure in terms of his commitment to beauty. And for me, beauty suggests meaning. Beauty, for me, reaches beyond symmetry, mathematics and design and into a place of profound truth. I feel that Oscar Wilde had access to this place of profound truth and was greatly conflicted because he was ultimately, I suppose, unable to be who he truly was safely, and this contradiction, one could argue, led to his demise. If you want to learn more stuff about Oscar Wilde, do that. If you've got any more questions about Oscar Wilde, ask me and I'll do my best to answer them. But these people are not people that I claim to be a scholar of, just people that when I've discovered them in life, they've made being in the world a bit easier because of the way they approach life, because their lives stand mythically as a kind of template to regard, warnings, lessons, and also great power. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this mailing list, and the real take home is get 10 people to sign up for it. Please pre-order Revelation, the link, and it's dependent on your territory, which one you'll click on. There's one for America, one for Europe, one for whatever, I don't know all the different bits, but have a little look at that, and please pre-order if you can afford it. Sign up to Luminary if you can afford it. Watch the YouTube videos if you have the time, and follow me on social media to get as much of this free content that we happily do for you as you possibly can. Anyway, sending you loads of love. If there's anything you want from me, if you want to sort of nail down a name here, some people are saying they want to see me talk about Alan Watts or Bob Marley or George Harrison. I'd be well into talking about those things. Yeah, let me know what you want. I hope that you are enjoying these mailing list videos that we make for you. Thank you.